Hey, what's up, Sabscribers? It's your girl Sab again with another episode of Suffering of Silence. So, I wanted to actually make an extra episode this month. Just seeing as there's just many things going on. It is Mental Health Awareness Month, it is AAPI Heritage Month, and I don't know. I just felt like making an extra episode to share with you guys. So, now that you guys know a little bit more about me, my background, my heritage, and whatever, and my family, I I know it's usually frowned upon to be very open and honest about your family shit or just your personal shit in general. But I made this podcast not just because I was in an abusive relationship that traumatized me, but I also did it because I had to uncover a lot of the obviously I had to heal myself, and part of healing myself was uncovering where and when things really went wrong and why it resulted me being, making the choices that I made to be in relationships that I chose to be in my adult life. And a part of that has been, and this is never to point blame on anyone, and I want to say that every single time I talk about these things because I take full responsibility, absolutely, in all the decisions and choices that I've made. But I also have to understand that my fucked upness didn't come just organically. There's obviously something that went wrong in my childhood that resulted in the fucked upness that I have. But I'm working on it. I take responsibility in healing those versions of me and fixing those things that are fucked up. So I wanted to make this episode because I really wanted to emphasize how much, this isn't exactly a typical way of discussing AAPI heritage, and this might lean more towards the mental health awareness. But either way, I want people to understand that my identification with my cultural heritage is a major impact in my mental health in general. So I think it all ties together very well. And what I'm about to say and the things that I want to say in this episode, I want to make sure that everyone understands that I will talk about a lot of abusive and potentially even stalking and harassing behaviors. So just if that is something that triggers you, I would highly recommend stopping this episode now because I'm about to divulge a lot of shit here and maybe even some sexual trauma. So please just refrain from listening to the rest of the episode if it does trigger you. But I wanted to really talk about, I didn't really get too dark and deep into how my identity as an Asian American ties into my mental health. I gave some insight into that, but not exactly everything. Not even the darkest stuff. So I think also what inspired me to make this episode was recent events that have happened. This past weekend was Mother's Day weekend. So if anyone knows me personally, especially nowadays, they know how strained my relationship with my mom is. And I don't want to expose her, or I don't want to villainize her to anyone, especially not to myself. But in all honesty, I've had to realize in the more recent years of my life that she has played the biggest role as, well, she's essentially been the biggest narcissist I've ever known in my life. And here's the thing. I clearly love my mother to death. And I'm not going to feel guilty for being selfish anymore, because I've had to in the past. I felt like I needed to feel guilty in the past, and that's what's held me back for so many years, especially the last 10 years. I have thrown my life away for so many people, and I continue to feel guilty for not meeting their expectations. And all of it has stemmed from having almost impossible expectations my whole life. If you know one thing about narcissists, they set a certain expectation of you and then they change it to manipulate you, to make you feel like you're insane, to make you feel like you're never good enough. And that would be the easiest way I can explain my relationship with her. And I'm going to jump into it further and explain even more in depth on how all of this affects me. But, even it's not to say that I wouldn't go above and beyond for my mother. It's to say that I have tried to in every possible way that I can, and it still doesn't make her happy. And I'll be honest, I'm probably going to get super emotional in this episode just because, it's still such a very raw topic for me. And, not to, put so much of my business out there, but I recently purchased my first home in the last couple of years. And my intention was to purchase it on my own. So if anyone knows anything about first-time home purchasing, buying, whatever, if anyone knows anything about first-time home buying, you know that you can obviously do it with little to no money of your own even. And you can also do it with even a bad credit score if you wanted. Shit. I mean, it's going to affect you as far as your rates go, but obviously there were opportunities for me as a first-time home buyer, and I was trying to take advantage of those opportunities and start my own thing. What really set it off for me and inspired me to even purchase a home, because that wasn't really a dream or aspiration of mine until I was much older, much older in life. But if I were to purchase a home at this age in my 20s, I plan to have purchased an investment property. But my intention behind it was also to have and allow my nephews and niece to have somewhere to call home, to always be able to come home to. And also my grandma at the time. I wanted my grandma to be able to have a yard, or I didn't want to see her live out the last years of her life living cooped up in an apartment. And seeing that was just, it was literally heartbreaking, because I've always been privileged enough that my dad has always given us a decent life. We weren't well off, but my dad was very financially literate, and he tried to ensure that we were always set up for success and made sure we always had a home. We never had to rent. We never had to live in an apartment. So I am grateful and privileged for that reason. Even if the houses that we lived in the neighborhoods we lived in were not the best areas, it was, it was our own. So I've always had that privilege in my life, and I never take that for granted, and I never doubt it. I never deny it. You know what I mean? And so when I initially got out of this abusive relationship, I actually obviously went back to living at home for a little while because I needed to get back on my feet. And that was maybe a couple of weeks. And then I got an apartment of my own. We actually sold the house that my dad left behind. And if anyone knows anything about, well, y'all don't know anything about my life unless you know me personally. And so when I was 18, my parents actually took in my 3 nephews and my niece. So they immediately went from having an 18-year-old child and being child free to then having 4 additional children on their hands. And all of this was happening while my dad was going through his diagnosis with the tumor, which then progressed to cancerous cells and so on and so on. So essentially, I give that background because I feel like it's important to what I'm about to explain and just everything in general, right? I got out of this abusive relationship and I went back home and then I got my own place. And since we sold the home that my dad left behind, we had to settle in so in my apartment, I actually had my grandma live with me because it just worked a lot easier. So seeing just the way the situation was going and just the way my family life was going, I couldn't coop like 4 kids into my apartment, my 2-bedroom apartment, and with my grandma. So, after a few months of living in the apartment, I decided, like, you know what, maybe it's just time for me to buy a home, because at this point, like, I can't watch my family live like this. And also, I was so willing to take on the responsibility of stepping up and being that role for my family that my dad left behind, kind of, I don't know, trying to keep things together. But also, I'm the only person who was capable of kind of doing these things for my family and making these sacrifices. And if anyone knows me, I keep saying that, but to know me is to know that I'm very heavily involved with my family, and especially like my nephews and nieces. And I guess I do that a lot because it gives me a lot of it gives me a lot of satisfaction in serving the people that I love and I care about. And I can't be unselfish, or I can't, yeah, like I only know how to be unselfish. And it's cost me a lot in my life, I feel like. And obviously there's times where I still make selfish decisions and choices that are not the best decisions and choices. But I mean, it ultimately, deep down, like, I'm just not that person, really. Like, I will literally cut my arm off and give it to my family if they needed an arm or something. Like, I am always so willing to make sacrifices for them. But it always seemed like it was never enough because, like I said, the expectations and everything just never seemed like it always was moving. It was always like, it's basically like a pole, like a flagpole. Or here, let me put it this way. It's like a finish line that always keeps moving. And that's how my mom treats me. And that's how she's treated me my entire life. She's always hoped that I get this corporate job and I work in an office and I work a good 9 to 5 and make good money, and I follow this path. Look at me now. I work a 9 to 5. I have a decent job. I have a stable job that's in an office setting or in a corporate world. And it's still not good enough for her. It's still not good enough for her. And then even to think about me buying this house, right? Like, I was planning to do this on my own because I didn't want anyone to have any say so over the house that I picked and over what I chose to do with my house and just in general, right? Like, I wanted my own shit, and I wanted to have my, I wanted to spend, I wanted to do this on my own for my own independence, but also, I wanted my nephews and nieces to always have a place to come home to, because I know that they weren't going to get that from anyone else. And understanding the way that my mother is as a person has also opened my eyes to the fact that no matter what distance comes between me and my nephews and niece, like, I will always be there for them and I will always have their back, Even if we have like the worst of falling outs, like they know that I will always give them a home if it's really needed. And I wanted to be that stable person for them. And I honestly made the biggest mistake of my life co-purchasing this home with my mom, because ultimately she took control of everything, which I'm not saying that she doesn't have a right to, but also at the same time, like if I if you push me to the point where I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to throw my hands up and just let you do your thing, you can't be mad at that because you wanted that. And then when you get it, it's not enough for you. And this is what I mean when I say the expectation is it's never just there. Like it's always, the finish line is always moving. It's always moving. And as grateful as I am for having the mother that I have and her being there for me and helping me get back on my feet, and after that relationship, there's just a lot to unpack in general with my mother wound. And I feel like the biggest thing I'm working through, the two biggest things that I'm working through right now with my mother wound and my relationship with her in general is, it started to uncover once I purchased my home with her. And I think it's like, it still breaks my heart to this day, because I start to think about how the first major argument we had when we first moved into our house, and that was about a month or two into buying this home, right? She immediately, I can't even explain it, but she essentially is very passive aggressive in the way that she communicates problems. It's either passive aggression or it's straight up disrespectful. And in order for me to be comfortable as a woman, because let me tell you, it took me 27 years to even call myself a woman. For 27 years of my fucking life, I never felt like a woman, because I never had my own identity. I never had the chance to acknowledge the fact that I am a fucking woman. But in this first argument, it was just some type of passive aggressive behavior that I got from her, or feelings that I got from her, and I just felt like I needed to walk on eggshells. And essentially it got to the point where, like, it wasn't even a blow up. Like, I didn't even argue with her. It was just her being shady and like saying disrespectful things to me, and me just cowering like a fucking child and not even saying anything to her, and just accepting the disrespect. It was more of the feeling that I got from her actions that set it off for me. Like, I can't even explain it other than to say it in this way. So, the way that she was making me feel triggered and reminded me of how I felt in my abusive relationship with my abusive ex, and with my abusive and narcissistic ex. And I can deal with the triggers, right? Like, I can tolerate the triggers. I can find a way to help myself regulate my emotions when I'm feeling triggered. But what I couldn't do was, I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that my own mother would make me feel that way. Like, I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that my own mother would literally make me feel just as shitty about myself as this abusive, narcissistic, and toxic person that I was once in an abusive relationship with. And that, for me, that moment, like, changed my whole fucking life. And that was the moment that really, like, set it off for me and, like, lit a fire under my ass. And I was like, yo, like, I want to make a podcast to talk about these things, because these conversations, they get so sugar-coated down the line. And I don't want to sugarcoat shit. I want to be honest, and I want to be as real as I can about this experience. And I can't tell y'all how much it really breaks my fucking heart to realize that the biggest narcissist in my life is my own mother. And I think what breaks my heart even more is the fact that, like, literally, like, she's all I have left. I don't have a dad anymore. I don't have my grandparents. I don't have my grandma anymore. And she's literally the only fucking person I have left. And I'm dying to hold on to this relationship. And that shit literally tears me up inside. Because I'm trying my fucking best to, like, maintain this relationship. But I can't keep hurting myself in the process. And it hurts me even more now because through all of this, like, I've been able to find my joy and my happiness again. I always feel so unfulfilled with this aspect of my life. Because I have to deal with it every day. I have to tolerate this every day. This unfulfilling emotion in this relationship with her. And, like, it's so hard to explain it because it's not that I don't allow grace or that I don't give her grace for doing the best she can. But it's my time for me to be selfish. And it's never to say that she hasn't sacrificed a lot for me. But also at the same time, like, not to be petty, but I ain't asked to be born. I joke, but, you know, I don't feel like I'm entitled to anything from her. I don't feel like I'm entitled to, I don't even want an apology or acknowledgement in some of the pain and the suffering that was caused and inflicted by her. Because, yeah, like, I don't expect that from people. But I at least expect her to just, you know, I just don't expect anything anymore. I don't even expect her to understand why I feel the way that I do, why I choose to make the choices that I make now, and why I choose to distance myself. I don't expect anything anymore because it's disappointing every single time. So, you know, I went through this. I can't even remember when I even purchased this home. It's been about a year and a half. Yeah, it's been about a year and a half. So, you know, not long after this argument or whatever, this little rift in our relationship, I didn't speak to my mom for months. Like, it was probably like a good 6 months that I didn't speak to her until my grandma passed away in March last year. And that was the only reason we talked. And even then, like, I don't even talk to people about this, but, like, I don't think I've ever even said this to anyone. But even when my grandma was dying, like, she made me feel so guilty for not being more attentive and being there for my grandma. And, like, she's like, I don't want to call you because I feel like you're gonna yell at me or you're gonna have an attitude. And it's like, okay, but like, do you understand why I don't want to communicate with you sometimes? Because you're literally straight up disrespectful to me. But also, don't blame me for any, like, it almost just felt like a shift in blame. And like, she just tried to make me feel guilty for my grandma passing away, for me not being here as much because I was busy working or living my life. And like I said, like, I never even said that to anyone before. And like the way she would make me feel guilty was insane to me, because it just is so unfair that like every single time someone passes away in my life, when it was my dad, she made me feel guilty for that. She made me feel guilty for not being there more. When it's my grandma, she made me feel guilty for not being there more. It's like a constant fucking pattern with her. And like, obviously I don't expect anyone to ever understand how it feels to be in this situation, but I know that there's a lot of people out there that have similar situations and really strained relationships with their mothers. But it hits different when you are so intertwined with, like, it hits different when you start losing the people around you. Like, to go through this with my dad passing away, then to go through this with my grandma passing away. And it's just insane to me that, like, I didn't speak to her for months. We live in the same fucking house. I didn't speak to her for months because I was still so heartbroken about how she made me feel and how it felt to be reminded and triggered of being in that abusive relationship again. And then when we finally talk, it's because my grandma's passing away. And not even to like make it seem like I'm the victim in any way, because I know I'm not. But even to add on to that, like, I tried to work through our relationship, but I also didn't want to get close to her because I was afraid to trust her. Because I knew that at any moment she would just attack. She would just, and when I say attack, I mean like the passive aggressive behavior and setting those expectations again, and then trying to move the expectations again, and then trying to, it was always going to be nonstop. So I kept my distance for some time. Until recently, I tried to be more involved with her and do more activities with her, like going to the temple and spending time with her, doing more traditional things. And then on Mother's Day this year, she decides she wants to, I guess the easiest way to say it is to have an attitude again and start the passive aggression again and the disrespect. And I understand her frustration. I understand, and I feel that she's justified in how she feels and whatever her concern is that she brought up, right? I understand that and I respect it. But also there's a level of respect that you gotta show me as a fucking human being, regardless if I'm your daughter or not. And I just don't ever expect to receive that from her. And that's the most heartbreaking shit. And I'm sorry, but I'm just not willing to accept that. I'm just not willing to make a justification of that's just how she is. Fuck that. Fuck that. especially when I know I will always have a choice in the matter. If I have a choice in the matter, my choice is either to stay and be somebody's bitch for the rest of my fucking life, or grow the fuck up and move the fuck on and continue to grow and progress in my own happiness. And I'm choosing myself this time and every single fucking time from here on out. And I say that straight the fuck up to everybody in my life, no matter who it is. I get it. I completely am so grateful and forever indebted to my mother for the sacrifices and the shit that she's had to give up for me. But it doesn't mean that I have to throw my entire fucking life away and not be my own independent fucking person just because. And maybe I speak like this because I'm not a fucking parent, but I would believe that as a parent, you would want the fucking best for your kids and more, and you would want them to have a life of their own, even if that means leaving you behind because you're not willing to grow the fuck up and get out of these toxic ass habits. I mean, that's probably just a selfish opinion of mine, but you know what used to break my heart the most was like having realized how much she's interfered with my relationship with my father. And I don't mean to say these things in a hateful way because I don't feel any hate towards her. I guess I could say and be honest that there is a lot of resentment in which I am working through, though. That's the thing. I am working through my resentment. And I can't say the same for her. But her interference with my relationship with my father has caused a lot of regret in my life and a lot of guilt. And I've had to work through it. And I'm still working through it, but I've gotten better at it. And I think I sort of mentioned this in my last episode about just in general when I was kind of going over like my family history and just all that stuff. So my relationship with my dad was always great until it wasn't, right? When I look back at pictures and videos of me, I was always such a daddy's girl. I loved my dad with my whole fucking heart. With my whole fucking heart. Now, I understand, and I don't want to speak like this about my dad just because he's no longer here, but he's also not here to defend himself. But, to be very honest, like my dad wasn't always the best person. He wasn't always this amazing guy. He was toxic, abusive, and, he had a lot of narcissistic tendencies, but understanding his intention behind a lot of the ways that he was, it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense. And I'm not justifying abuse in any way because that is unjustifiable. But understanding his anger for a lot of the things that happened makes fucking sense. It makes sense. That's all I'm going to say. And like I said, my dad wasn't perfect. He's not this, like, he wasn't the best person in the world. He wasn't the best husband all the time. But I know he tried his fucking best. And I understand that my mom has too. She's tried her best as well. But there is a difference in the way that they both love, right? And although my dad he gets abusive and he gets toxic, His intention was always to try and give us the best that we could that we could possibly get, right? Like he never wanted us to fail. And something that changed all of that for me, which really sucked, because like I said, when I was about 7 or 8, that's when my mind started to change a lot about my perspective on my dad and how much I actually love my dad and how my relationship with him was in general. Like all of that changed from that point on. But until I was 2021, and it was actually right after he was diagnosed with stage 4. And I quit my job to stay home with my family so I can help them more often and just simply be there. So after I quit my job, my dad literally, when he found out, he literally grabbed me, just gave, like, I think I was like leaving or something, and he pulled me aside in the hallway and he like grabbed me and he literally gave me a hug and said, he looked me in my eyes and told me that, and he said it in Hmong too. And if anyone knows how it feels to hear certain things in another language, it just hits differently. And he basically told me that he's like, he was just like, baby girl, you didn't have to do that for me. You shouldn't have done that for me. Because I'm your father. And I'm supposed to take care of you and make those sacrifices for you. You shouldn't have to do those things for me. You should be living your life. Like, that literally brought me. Like, I was literally fucking bawling when he did that. When he said that to me. And I don't think I ever told my mom that. I don't think I ever talked to her about that. Because it just didn't seem like something I would even care to share with her, because she would never understand. And that's how I knew that, like, that changed a lot for me. Like, that changed my perspective on my relationship with him. And just in general, who he actually was. Because, like, my whole life, I was villainizing him, and I was seeing him as this awful human fucking being, and not giving him grace for making mistakes, and not giving him the chance to even fix the situation. And it just always, I don't know. That's kind of where everything changed for me, as far as like all the resentment and the hate that I felt about, I don't even want to say hate. Hate is such a strong word. But a lot of the resentment that I've held against him, and identifying with my Hmong culture. Because even if I look back further into my life, as I mentioned before, I was always bullied and teased for being half Hmong by my mother's family. And I never felt protected enough unless my dad was around. And not because he's Hmong and it's his culture to defend, but because I was his daughter and he would defend me. And he wouldn't take no shit for that. I've realized that I never felt that way with my mother. I never trusted her to defend me. And then eventually, as I get older, she starts to build this hatred and resentment in me. And what almost feels like to me, like I was being brainwashed to like hate my father because of whatever issues they had in their relationship. And for so many years, I held on to a lot of that hatred. Like I held on to a lot of that resentment towards my mother when I realized like how badly I fucked up by not building on this relationship with my dad. But also having, like I said, I take a lot of, and like I said, that resentment is not just towards her, but towards me. And the guilt ate me up inside for years. But I had to realize that, like, I was a child. I couldn't make those choices logically and clearly because I was a child. A lot of my decisions and choices were made based off of my surroundings. And not only did my mother hate my dad, my sisters did. They were the biggest influences in my life because they were the ones I see every single day. And on top of all of this, right, having realized that I essentially felt like I was being brainwashed as a child, and finally getting those moments of clarity just changed everything for me. But it was too late. It was too late. I couldn't make up for all those years that I missed with my dad. Not in a few short months before he passes. Not in the last year before he passed. It was too late for me to do that. Because he wasn't the same person anymore. And, it wasn't even the resentment towards my mother that really broke my heart with that situation. It was more of the fact that I had all this guilt of not loving my dad enough. And I wish I could even explain how it feels. Now that I'm working through things and like it's hard because it's like I don't even got daddy issues. Not like that, at least not bad. I have more mommy issues than I have daddy issues, and that's more complex to work through, especially as a woman. Especially as a woman. I don't even know I don't even know where to begin sometimes. But you know, a year ago, when I really worked through all of this, I started unpacking a lot of my trust issues that stemmed from my mother. I started unpacking, accepting that I am a fucking woman. And I need to stand on that shit. It's like a constant ego battle with her. And you know what, at the end of the day, I don't give a fuck enough to fight with anyone else's ego. I'm good. You can let your ego win. I'm cool. You got it. And recognizing that the woman that I looked up to my whole life is not even the person that I actually thought they were. And like that fucked my mind up. When I tell you that shit fucked my mind up, I can't even explain it. Literally, when I unpacked everything and started to remember all of the things that happened, it fucked me up inside to accept the fact that there was no one to look up to anymore. There was no woman I can idolize ever again in my life, because I have surpassed her in almost every other way. Emotionally, mentally, all of that. And I could never, ever go back to the same shit. And that fucked me up. Like, I can't even say it enough times. Like, it really, really blew my mind. Having to accept that and having to wrap my mind around it, because there was nothing I could do. There was nothing else I could do but accept the fact that I have surpassed her in that way. And I can never look back and be like, what would my mom do? It's not to say that she isn't a strong woman in her own right, but to continue the same unhealthy habits and patterns, like, I refuse to be that way. I can remember myself being a child and just telling myself, I refuse to be like my parents. I refuse to be toxic like that. I refuse to be that level of unhinged. I never wanted to be like them. And then I forget all of it. I start getting into the same types of toxic relationships and cycles and patterns and behaviors and bullshit like that. I disappointed little me by becoming exactly what I said I would never do. My only thing I can ever praise myself on is that I'd never reproduced with someone else and continued the cycle again. Because I was never in a mental place that I could ever really do that and have healthy children. Physically, possibly, yes, but mentally, I could never form mentally healthy children in the state of mind that I was in at any other point in my life in the past. And even now, I would never see myself in that place. There's just too much fucked upness in me that I don't know if that is even something that's feasible to ever be and ever be able to raise healthy children who don't have to experience these same fucking toxic cycles. And maybe that's just my own fears speaking out. But I mean, I know I would never say some of the things that have been said to me. I would never do some of the things that have been done to me as a child. Absolutely would never do that to my child. But, there's a cold fucking world out here. And there's a lot of possibilities and a lot of fucking people that can harm children nowadays. But I'm getting besides the point here. But, as a kid, always, already not feeling accepted by your own siblings. And then for your mother to tell you. Now, I remember the first time my mom ever said this to me. I was maybe 4 or 5. when she turned and told me, it was like after an argument with my dad or something, or some type of whatever friction they had. And she turns and tells me, sitting in the car with her, she's like, had I known where the abortion clinics were here in Milwaukee, I never would have had you. I would have aborted you. I would never want to stay with your dad. So, yeah. Tell me when I ever felt wanted. And the only person that ever showed me unconditional love was my dad. And I can understand his frustration and why I got my ass beat as a kid, because I wanted to I wanted to push against him on every aspect, on every part of his authority, because I didn't like him. I thought he was this evil fucking person. And my mom villainized him so much in my eyes that I never saw him for what he actually, like who he actually was and how he was trying to protect me. Now, I'm not saying that the shit was justified, but like, I get it. I get it now. Now, that's a lot to unpack, right? Like, even down to small things like my last name. My last name should not be what it is. But because of her resentment and disdain for my father, she never even put him on my birth certificate. And she never even gave me his last name. She gave me her last name, which is actually her ex-husband's last name. So this last name has no affiliation or association to me whatsoever. But I've identified with it for the last 28 years of my fucking life. So, yeah. But yeah, so even small things like that. And how she would say how much my dad never wanted me and never loved me. And only until I was born that he cared to step up to the plate, because he never wanted me. And I don't even know. I don't even know what's true anymore. But at this point, I don't give a fuck. My perception of who he was already being altered. And I'm just going to see him for who he is. And yeah, everything's just fucked up. And this is really just scratching the surface of unpacking my mother wounds. But I say all this to say, the reason that I feel like it all ties together with my mental health and my cultural identity is because everything has always been very confusing for me from the beginning. You know, I'm already being bullied and teased for being Hmong. And then on the other end, I'm being, the person that should be protecting me, my own mother, is the same person that's also making me have resentment and dislike for the actual part of me that's Hmong, my dad. So there's really no wonder why I became a very lost and confused child, and why I had certain dark thoughts early on in my life. Never belonging was always just how I was and who I am. And never fitting the mold and never fitting into anyone's expectations of who or what I should be is essentially just how I've always identified. And it kind of just sucks, because I will always feel like I will always feel confused about that until I really continue to work through I'm working through it. But as I continue to work through it, I just have no fucking clue what I'm doing. There's no guidebook on how to be an Asian American. There's no guidebook on how to be a better woman based off of who I am and the things I identify with and the things that I love to do. There's no guidebook on who I'm becoming. And for me, that was always such an important thing because I used to want to live by the rules so badly. And I got to let that part go. I got to let that go because I know that I'm not, like, I can accept and know that I don't fit the mold. But to really live it, to really live outside of that, it's a lot harder than said, you know? I just sometimes, I don't know, I guess I just feel so drained right now. I feel so exhausted from everything that, I just feel so drained of everything. This is already a tough month for me. And then to have to feel this way again and continue to put my guard back up with my relationship with my mother and how I interact with her, it's just becoming to be like just too much for me. Just too fucking much for me. And unfortunately, I'm financially binded to the situation and constantly feeling like I have little to no choice but to stick around. So this is very vulnerable, very real life, real time events happening. But I just thought I'd share this because it's not that I hate myself for being Asian American. It's not that I hate myself for being Laotian. It's not that I hate myself for being Hmong. But it's hard to identify with my it's hard for me to identify with my cultural heritage when a lot of it is tied to a lot of my trauma, and a lot of it is tied to a lot of my deterioration of my mental health. So that all incorporates into a lot of the confusion I have and a lot of the complications I have with identifying with myself and my cultural background. So I know this is a little bit darker of an episode, but I just thought it'd be something good to share with you guys, to kind of understand me more and understand why, like dissecting, just to dissect like why I am the way I am and just who I feel like I am as an Asian American. And yeah, hopefully this all makes sense in some way. But hey, in the meantime, make sure you send in some of your feedback. Send in some of your stories. Hit the DMs, hit the whatever. Y'all can find me on TikTok and Instagram, Suffering of Silence Pod. I really do want to start the segment of like reading off some stories and like sharing some insight from my listeners. And now you guys can find me everywhere on all platforms. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, which isn't really going to be a thing much longer because they're moving over to YouTube. And iHeartRadio. You can find me on all podcast platforms now. It's just Suffering in Silence. But yeah, I hope that you guys learn a few things out of this. And yeah, it's your girl Sab. It's another episode of Suffering of Silence. I will look forward to talking to you guys again very soon. Thanks for listening, subscribers.